Hello and welcome back. So, I was in the process of setting up to shoot a video on panoramas, and in the process, I was, using my light meter to get the lighting for the setup right and my exposure correct. And I realized that it would maybe be useful to respond to a comment that was made on a video I did a couple of months ago, which was describing a hack where you could use a ambient light sensing colorimeter as a light meter. And so I got a comment which on my site pointsandfocus.com, where I also posted the video, roughly saying to the assent, paraphrase, because I don't really want to read the whole thing, but paraphrased, or you could, buy a light meter, and they're not that expensive if you buy them used. And, they're better, you'll get more accurate results, you'll get them quicker, etc., etc. And, on one hand, yes, exactly, you can buy a light meter. In fact, that's what I did. I bought a light meter. I wasn't describing this hack as a way to say, don't buy a light meter. Light meters are obsolete or bad or something like that. I was describing the hack because under certain circumstances, it was an effective way to deal with the fact that at the time that I was recording that video and several of the videos around there, I didn't have a light meter. And that's sort of the purpose of a hack, right? I mean, it's not to be the better tool because, obviously, if a colorimeter for calibrating your monitors is the better tool for measuring light levels, that's what everybody would use, and light meters wouldn't really exist because they would be pointless. Instead, the point of a hack is to use something that wasn't inherently intended to be used for that purpose, so a colorimeter with an ambient light display mode, and to deal with the shortcomings, because there are inevitably going to be shortcomings, and press it into service as something that it didn't have. And so perhaps, on one hand, Andrew, who responded, is perfectly correct. Yes, get a light meter. If the right tool for you at the job, for what you're trying to do is a light meter, then you should be using a light meter. At the same point, I feel like he kind of missed my point, which was not to say don't buy light meters, but to say if you're a photographer and you're getting into this whole YouTube thing and whatnot, and you're doing the type of work where, like here, I'm standing in front of a camera talking about something or demonstrating something, and I don't have a camera operator, I have to do everything myself, it becomes incredibly difficult to have somebody, I don't have a stand-in, to stand here and adjust exposure settings to get the right, or get it at good exposure on the camera while I'm setting up. And in this type of situation, yes, a light meter is exactly the right tool to have. And I would sort of strongly suggest if you're, starting into YouTube or you're doing this kind of work that you should be using a light meter, simply because it's far easier and more appropriate to deal with than trying, I don't know, there's a lot of ways you could do it. For example, the Canon 5D Mark IVs that I have do Wi-Fi, and I can use my tablet or phone to connect to the camera, and I can see the live view and the histogram and so forth, and make the adjustments that way, although in my experience that has its own slew of problems and potential problems, and it literally is not anywhere near as fast as clicking the button, holding the button up in front of your subject, or me in this case, clicking the button, reading the numbers off the settings, and going and setting the camera. So, like I said, light meter, good things. Now, I do want to talk briefly about light meters, since I'm talking here is in a response to that video about using a colorimeter instead of a light meter, and I don't want to say, I'm not a member of the light meter users club or something like that. I have a light meter now, but like most things in photography, videography, etc., it's a situationally dependent tool. For the first decade that I did photography, I had absolutely no use for a light meter because I don't do the kind of work where I need to make a meter reading at a specific location and then dial settings into the camera. The vast majority of my photography was landscape and wildlife, and even the product photography that I was doing for my website was being done in an environment where I had absolutely no problem taking a picture, looking at the histogram, either in the camera, or even better, looking at the raw process or the raw processed histogram on my computer and making adjustments. And while it's arguable that a light meter will give you better results than using a colorimeter, although I've tested this briefly, and to a certain extent, the different the results that I'm getting have been virtually indistinguishable within the limits of the hack and the capabilities of the hack. The best results you're going to get for the most accurate ability to get exposures and everything right is looking at the data that comes out of your camera, because like it or not, a light meter is making an estimate as to how the camera thinks the settings should be, and if the camera isn't using the same ISO rate or settings or gain settings or so forth, or the lens isn't truly f2.8, it's f2.7 or something to that effect, the camera is going to see something different than what the light meter thinks the camera should see. So that's kind of why I've never had a light meter. Now I have a light meter. And jumping into the light meter thing, the first light meter that I used, it was a Minolta Flashmate or something like that 3. I borrowed it from a friend of mine. He's been into photography a lot longer than I have. He was shot, back in the 70s and 80s and whatnot, where with manual, everything meter-free cameras and or meterless cameras, and had to use a light meter for a lot of his work. When he was at that time, and knowing him, I figured he'd probably have a light meter in his closet somewhere that I could borrow for a certain amount of time. And that's indicative, that kind of light meter, of the kind of meter that when I looked on eBay, the kind of meter that I found that you would be getting for not a lot of money, buying off of eBay. And there are some pros and cons to that. Of course, obviously, you're paying a lot less. This Sekonic here is, I think, about $200, $250, something like that. And if it's something that you're using all the time and it works best for you and you can justify it with, for example, the financial, it's part of your business or whatever, then by all means. But if you're just getting started, that find it on eBay thing is a pretty good solution. That said, there are some things that I would kind of point out to look out for or to be aware of. In fact, it's not even so much a look out for, it's just to be aware of. So most light meters historically have had 10th stop accuracy in their measurements. And this includes even like this modern Sekonic will measure in 10th full stop plus a 10th units. And so what this means is, for example, we might shoot at, say, now f3.5. f3.5 is a third stop, is 2/3 of stop actually above f2.8. On a light meter that measures in full stops plus tenths, that would show up as f2.8 plus, or f2.8.6 or f2.8.7, depending on how it exactly rounded the light levels. But either of those values, and you'd be setting f3.5 in your camera as opposed to f2.8. The caveat, of course, is, and this is the problem that I sort of had using the borrowed light meter, is I'm not used to thinking in full stops plus a tenth or plus tenths. So I would read f2.8.7 or whatever it was. I go plug f2.8 into the camera, and come back, look at the exposure, and go, why is it overexposed? Well, it's overexposed because I plugged in 2/3 of a stop wider aperture than the camera or that I needed for that scene. So that's something to be aware of. Now, modern light meters like the Sekonic can be set to full stop, half stop, and third stop increments, and the full stop one gives you the tenths, the half stop and third stops gives you half stop and third stops. A second thing to be aware of: most of these old light meters, unless it was a cinematography model, don't have the capability of dealing with shutter angles or the odd, for still photographers at least, shutter speeds that you would use in video. So normally in video, the traditional historic thing is to shoot with a 180-degree shutter angle. So if you're shooting at 24 frames a second with a 180-degree shutter angle, the actual shutter speed is a 48th of a second. Now, with HD DSLRs, most of the time we would shoot at a 50th of a second because that's as close to a 48th of a second as we can get, and the cameras don't support either shutter angles or the specific 48th shutter speeds. However, I believe Panasonic Lumix Micro Four Thirds cameras do support shutter angles and potentially even the 48th shutter speed when shooting video. And these modern light meters can be configured to, at least this Sekonic, this is, by the way, a Sekonic L308X-U. These can be configured to work in shutter angles or, so frames per second shutter angle, or in an HDSLR type mode where you have shutter speeds, but could have that 48th shutter speed, and so it's kind of included in the list of, or it is included in the list of shutter speeds. Those won't exist on the other, these older photography light meters. They will have the traditional either full stops, potentially third stops. The one I was borrowing did shutter speeds and third stops. Will have those kinds of, or maybe it didn't, I don't even remember now, but it will have those kinds of traditional photography, still photography settings. So, I mean, how big of a difference does it make between a 48th and a 50th of a second in terms of exposures? It's not going to make a tremendous amount of difference, but it's something to be aware of. Additionally, the majority of those old light meters don't include a setting for ISO 850. And ISO 850 is a bit of an oddball. However, that's the base ISO that a lot of cinema bodies, like I think Canon C100 or C300 or something like that, operate at and get the most dynamic range at. And so again, if you're trying to meter and you're trying to be as accurate as possible, you want to be able to set the ISO on the light meter to 850 as opposed to 800 or 1000. And with these modern light meters, you can do that. And with an older photography-based light meter, that capability isn't built into the light meter, or in the light meter. So that's something to be aware of if you are actually looking for a light meter. And again, like I said, it's a situational specific tool. If I wasn't standing here in front of a camera in my, without assistance or anything like that, or I was a commercial studio photographer that was doing work on set or with clients, or even in videography, if I was doing stuff which I'd like to potentially get to eventually, but where I'm doing videography stuff in an office or for a client at a client's location, being able to stick the light meter out, hit the button, get your measurement, and go set the camera is a heck of a lot more professional than guessing and checking, guessing and getting it wrong, or trying to do some kind of cumbersome thing with a colorimeter and a laptop or something like that. It is the right tool for the job. And I want to be clear, I wasn't saying that in the previous video that a colorimeter would be a better tool or was a better tool. Just that under certain conditions, and in my case that was sitting in a fixed environment with essentially fixed lights, it was an acceptable tool in the interim before getting an actual light meter. So I hope that maybe clears up some questions, or opens some questions, or clears up some things about light meters. I actually kind of went on a little longer than I intended to here, but if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. If you like this video and want, please smash the like button. If you'd like to see more content like this and be notified of it as I create it and get it posted, please subscribe to my channel. It would be very helpful for me just to even know that there are people out there, that are interested in this stuff. And, if you have a comment, please leave a comment in the comments below. So, as I guess that wraps it up. Thanks for watching, and until next time.